Okay, so today we're going to try something a little bit different.
Different? Good.
Yeah, we're going to take some really complex ideas and explain them in a way that would make sense to like the smartest person you can imagine.
Okay, so like explaining it to a genius.
Exactly. And the idea is if we can explain it clearly and engagingly to like a super genius, then that means we must really understand it ourselves.
And of course, our listeners benefit from that clarity too.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you're all really sharp and insightful people. So we want to make sure we're presenting things in a way that really clicks for you. It's like getting to the heart of the matter without having to wade through tons of, complex research and jargon.
And speaking of research, that's really where we've been digging deep for this deep dive.
That's right. Tons of psychology studies,
Yeah.
specifically the ones that focus on, understanding and improving the human experience.
And you find the coolest stuff buried in those studies, like nuggets of wisdom that can completely change how you think and act.
Totally. And our job is to like extract those nuggets and present them to you
Yeah.
in a way that's, both accurate and immediately useful.
Precisely. And as if we were explaining it to a very, discerning mind, someone who values both efficiency and depth.
Yeah. Someone who wants to get to the good stuff quickly, but also wants to really understand it deeply. And that actually reminds me of this story Richard Wiseman tells about, I think it was a conference he was at.
Yeah.
And someone came up to him after hearing about all this research on happiness and basically said, look, I just want some genuinely effective advice I can actually use like right now.
I love that, like, cut to the chase, what actually works.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really our mission for this deep dive, taking all this amazing research from psychology and presenting it in a way that not only makes sense, but is immediately relevant and actionable, like stuff you can use today to improve your mood, your relationships, your life, basically.
Absolutely. And I think we have some pretty surprising findings to share.
We do. All right. So let's dive right in. The first thing we're going to tackle is this idea that big changes don't always require like massive effort.
Right. There's this emerging understanding in behavioral science that small actions can actually lead to really rapid change.
Yeah. And some of it is super counterintuitive, like the whole idea of thought suppression. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. It's basically like the harder you try not to think about something, the more you end up thinking about it.
Right. And there's this famous experiment by Daniel Wagner called the polar bear experiment.
Where they tell people, whatever you do, don't think about a white polar bear.
And of course, everyone immediately starts picturing white polar bears.
Exactly, because trying to suppress a thought often backfires and makes it even stronger. So, like, if you're about to give a presentation and you tell yourself, don't be nervous, it might actually make you more anxious.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
No, I've definitely done that before. Okay, so what are some things that actually do work? Like, what are some small actions that lead to positive changes?
Well, one that's been studied a lot is expressive writing.
Well, yeah, like journaling.
Exactly. And it's not just, writing about your day. It's about writing about your deepest thoughts and feelings, especially about challenging experiences.
Interesting. So how does that work?
Well, there have been tons of studies, and they show that even a short amount of focused writing like this can have some pretty amazing benefits.
Like what?
For example, people who wrote about traumatic events, they had fewer health problems, they had higher self-esteem, even their overall happiness increased.
Wow. I wouldn't have thought just writing could do all that.
Right, and what's interesting is that just talking about the same events often doesn't have the same effect.
So there's something about the act of writing itself that makes a difference.
It seems to facilitate a deeper level of processing and emotional release.
That's so cool.
Uh,
Okay, what else?
well, another surprisingly powerful technique is gratitude.
Oh, yeah, gratitude. I feel like that gets talked about a lot, but does it actually do anything?
It really does. There was a study where they had people list 5 things they were grateful for each week.
Okay, and what happens?
Well, compared to the groups that listed their annoyances or just neutral events, the gratitude group ended up happier, more optimistic, even physically healthier.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And what kind of things were they grateful for?
All sorts of things, like everyday stuff, like
Yeah.
a beautiful sunset or a kind gesture from a friend. It highlights how shifting your attention to the positive can make a real difference.
Yeah, it's like training your brain to notice the good things that are already there.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Okay, so we've talked about writing and gratitude. What about visualization? Everyone talks about visualizing your success, right?
Yeah, and that can be helpful for achieving long-term goals. But when it comes to improving your mood in the moment, research suggests that visualizing your inner perfect self might be more effective.
What do you mean by in a perfect self?
It's like visualizing the ideal version of yourself, embodying the qualities you aspire to have, like confidence or compassion.
So instead of picturing getting that promotion, you picture yourself being the kind of person who gets promotions.
Exactly. It's about focusing on your internal state rather than external achievements.
Interesting. And does that actually work?
It seems to research suggests it can have a more immediate positive effect on your mood.
So if you're feeling down, instead of visualizing that dream vacation, you visualize yourself being calm and content.
Right. And there's a technique related to this called an unusual diary.
Okay. An unusual diary, what's that all about?
It's not about recounting your day, it's about intentionally focusing on the positive. So you might list 3 things you're grateful for, or 3 things that went well and why.
Oh, I like that. So you're basically priming your brain to look for the good stuff.
Exactly, and to appreciate the good things that are already happening.
Okay, those are some really cool techniques for shifting your mindset. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that's on a lot of people's minds. Money and happiness. We always hear money can't buy happiness, but what does the research actually say?
It's a bit more nuanced than that, but the research is pretty clear that beyond meeting your basic needs, more money doesn't necessarily equal more happiness.
So like once you have enough to live comfortably, having even more money doesn't make you significantly happier.
Exactly. There's this concept called hedonistic adaptation, which basically means we get used to things really quickly.
So like you buy a new car and you're super excited at first, but then it just becomes your normal car.
Exactly. The novelty wears off, and your happiness level tends to go back to where it was before.
Okay, so if money doesn't buy happiness, then what does?
Well, research shows that about 50% of your happiness is influenced by your genes and another 10% by your life circumstances. But that leaves a significant 40% that comes from your daily thoughts and behaviors.
So we have a lot more control over our happiness than we might think.
Absolutely. And that's where things like gratitude and positive thinking come in.
Okay, so we can't control our genes or our circumstances, but we can control how we think and act.
Right. And when it comes to spending money, research has actually found some pretty specific things that can boost happiness.
Like what?
It turns out that spending money on experiences tends to make people happier than spending money on material possessions.
Really, why is that?
Well, for one thing, experiences create memories that we can look back on and enjoy for years to come.
Yeah, like a trip to Italy or a concert. You saw those memories stay with you.
Exactly, whereas material possessions tend to lose their novelty over time.
That new phone is just an old phone after a while.
Right, and experiences often involve other people, which can strengthen our social connections.
So going to a concert with friends is more likely to make you happy than buying a new TV.
Exactly, and researchers like Van Boven and Gilovich have done a lot of work on this.
Interesting. Okay, so spend money on experiences, not things. What else?
Another fascinating finding is that spending money on other people can boost happiness.
Really like giving gifts?
Yes, or donating to charity studies have shown that people who spend a higher percentage of their income on others tend to be happier.
That's counterintuitive.
Oh.
I would think people would be happier spending money on themselves.
You'd think so, but it turns out that generosity has its own rewards.
Okay, but why is that?
Well, brain imaging studies have shown that when people give to others, it activates the reward centers in their brains.
So it literally feels good to be generous.
It seems so, and these are the same areas that are activated when we satisfy basic needs like food and water.
Wow, so giving is like a fundamental human need.
It might be, and you don't have to give a lot of money. Even small acts of kindness can make a big difference.
Really, like what?
Well, research by Lubomirsky found that doing multiple acts of kindness in one day boosted happiness more than spreading those same acts out over a week.
Interesting. So it's like a concentrated dose of kindness.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be anything major like holding the door for someone or giving a compliment.
Okay, so we've covered how to shift our mindset and how to spend our money wisely. Now let's talk about persuasion and how to become more likable.
Sounds good.
A lot of people think that rewards are the best way to influence others, like offering bonuses or incentives.
Yeah, that's a common assumption, but it's not always the case.
Really? What do you mean?
Well, there's a classic study by Lepper where they had kids drawing with markers.
Okay.
And some of the kids were told they would get a reward for drawing while others weren't.
What happened?
Well, the kids who were promised a reward actually spent less time drawing on their own later on.
Oh, interesting. So the reward actually made them less interested in drawing.
So it's like the reward shifted their motivation from intrinsic enjoyment to extrinsic reward.
So it's better to encourage people's natural interest
Yeah.
rather than trying to bribe them.
Exactly. And when it comes to being persuasive and likable, there are some other surprising strategies that have been proven to work.
Okay, like what?
Well, one is revealing your weaknesses early on.
Really, wouldn't you want to hide your weaknesses and focus on your strength?
You'd think so, but research suggests that admitting a small flaw up front can actually make you more likable and trustworthy.
Interesting. Why is that?
It makes you seem more honest and relatable. It shows that you're self-aware and not afraid to be vulnerable.
So like if you're going on a job interview, you might mention a skill you're still working on.
Exactly. It shows that you're not trying to present a perfect image, which can be off-putting.
Okay, so don't be afraid to show your flaws a little bit. What else?
Well, there's this thing called the pratfall effect, which basically means that making a small mistake can actually make you more likable.
Really? I thought mistakes made you look incompetent.
Well, major mistakes obviously aren't good, but small blunders can make you seem more human and approachable.
So like if you trip and fall while walking into a room?
Exactly. As long as it's not a serious fall, people might actually find you more endearing.
That's so strange. But I guess it makes sense. We don't want to be around people who seem perfect all the time.
Right. It can be intimidating. And there's another interesting phenomenon called the Franklin effect.
Okay, the Franklin effect. What's that?
It's the idea that people tend to like you more after they've done you a favor.
That's weird. Why would that be?
Well, one theory is that it's a way of justifying their actions to themselves.
So if they did you a favor, they must like you.
Exactly. It's like their brain is trying to make sense of their behavior.
That's fascinating. Okay, so what are some other quick ways to get people to like you or agree with you?
Well, one effective technique is to get them to say yes early on in the conversation.
Really? Like how?
You can start with a simple question that, they'll agree with.
So like nice weather today, isn't it?
Exactly. And once they've said yes, they're more likely to agree with you on other things.
It's like you're building momentum.
Exactly. And another important factor is similarity.
Similarity, like how?
People tend to like people who are similar to them in various ways.
Like what?
Well, it could be anything from their appearance to their opinions to their background.
So if you want to persuade someone, it helps to find common ground with them.
Exactly, and emphasize those similarities. And you know what else can help humor?
Really? I thought humor was risky in a professional setting.
It can be, but when done well, a little bit of humor can go a long way. Well, it can lighten the mood, make you seem more approachable, and even make your arguments more memorable.
So a well-placed joke can actually help you persuade someone.
It can, and there's research to back that up.
Interesting. Okay, so what about when you're the one who needs help? There's this thing called the bystander effect, right?
Right, that's the phenomenon where people are less likely to help someone in need when there are other people around.
Yeah, it's like everyone assumes someone else will take care of it.
Exactly, and it can be really dangerous, but there's a simple way to overcome it.
What's that?
If you need help, single out a specific person, make eye contact, and tell them what you need.
So don't just yell help to the crowd.
Right. Address a specific individual and make it clear what you need them to do.
That's really good advice. Okay, what about those classic persuasion techniques like foot in the door and door in the face? Do those still work?
They do, and they're really interesting. Foot in the door is where you start with a small request and then follow up with a larger one.
So like asking someone to sign a petition and then asking them to donate money.
Exactly, and the idea is that once they've agreed to the small request, they're more likely to agree to the larger one.
Interesting. And what about door in the face?
That's the opposite. You start with a large request that's likely to be rejected and then follow up with a smaller one.
So like asking someone to volunteer 20 hours a week and then asking them to volunteer 5 hours.
Exactly. And the idea is that the smaller request seems more reasonable in comparison.
Okay, so it's all about framing.
Exactly. And there are even more unconventional techniques like the peak technique and disrupt than reframe.
Those sound intriguing. What are those?
Peak technique is where you make a really unusual request like asking someone for 37 cents instead of a quarter.
Why would you do that?
It catches their attention and makes them more likely to comply.
Really? I guess it makes them stop and think.
Exactly. And disrupt, then reframe is where you say something unexpected to disrupt their thinking and then follow up with your request.
So like saying, this product costs 3 easy payments of 19.99 instead of just saying $59.97.
Exactly. The unexpected phrasing can make them more likely to buy.
Okay, those are some pretty clever techniques.
Definitely.
Let's move on to stress management and decision making. When you're feeling angry, it's tempting to just let it all out, right? Like yell or punch something. Is that actually a good way to deal with anger?
Well, the idea of catharsis is appealing, but research suggests that venting your anger can actually make you more aggressive.
Really? So punching a pillow isn't a good idea.
It might not be. It seems to reinforce the anger rather than releasing it.
Okay, so what should you do instead?
Distraction is often a better strategy in the moment.
So like go for a walk or listen to music.
Exactly. Anything that shifts your focus away from the anger and in the long run, trying to find some positive meaning in the experience can help.
What do you mean?
Well, research has shown that people who try to find the silver lining in negative events tend to feel less resentful.
So instead of dwelling on how unfair something was, you try to find some lesson or opportunity in it.
Exactly. It's about reframing the experience in a more positive light. And speaking of reframing, there's this fascinating study about mindset and blood pressure.
Okay, tell me about it.
They had these hotel room attendants who did a lot of physical work, but didn't really think of it as exercise.
Okay.
And they told some of the attendants that their work was actually a great workout.
What happened?
Well, the attendants who were told that their work was exercise actually showed improvements in their health.
Really? Like what kind of improvements?
Their blood pressure and body mass index went down.
Wow. So just believing that their work was exercise made them healthier.
It seems so. It highlights the power of our beliefs.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so mindset matters a lot. What about decision making? Are there any common mistakes people make when trying to make good decisions?
Well, one big one is groupthink.
Groupthink. What's that?
It's when a group of people are so focused on reaching consensus that they don't properly consider all the options.
So they just go along with what everyone else is saying?
Exactly, and it can lead to bad decisions because they're not thinking critically.
Okay, so how do you avoid groupthink?
It's important to encourage everyone to speak up and share their opinions, even if they're different.
So make sure everyone feels comfortable disagreeing.
Exactly. And what about regret? Do you ever feel regret after making a decision?
Of course everyone does.
Well, research suggests that people tend to regret the things they didn't do more than the things they did.
Really? Why is that?
It seems to be related to our imagination.
How so?
We tend to imagine all the positive things that could have happened if we had made a different choice.
But we don't imagine all the negative things that could have happened.
Exactly. So it's important to remember that every choice has both potential benefits and drawbacks.
So don't romanticize the path not taken.
Right, and there are different ways people approach decision making.
Like what?
Well, some people are maximizers. They try to find the absolute best option.
And others are satisficers.
Right. They just look for an option that's good enough.
And which is better?
Well, research suggests that satisficers tend to be happier.
Really, why is that?
Because maximizers are always second-guessing themselves, wondering if they could have found something better.
So it's better to be content with a good decision rather than obsessing over finding the perfect one.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about lie detection. We all think we can spot a liar, but can we really?
Yeah, I've heard that people who are lying avoid eye contact or fidget a lot.
Those are common beliefs, but research hasn't really found those to be reliable indicators.
Really? So
Yeah.
how can you tell if someone is lying?
It's more about paying attention to their words than their body language.
What do you mean?
Well, liars tend to think harder about what they're saying, so they might speak more slowly or use more formal language.
So they're trying to control their speech.
Exactly. And they might also be more evasive in their answers.
Okay, so it's not about catching them in a single telltale sign. It's about looking at the overall pattern of their behavior.
Right. Okay, now let's move on to understanding yourself and others.
Sounds good. You know, we briefly talked about handwriting analysis before. Is there any truth to that?
Unfortunately, no. Despite its popularity, research has shown that handwriting analysis isn't actually a reliable way to assess personality.
So you can't tell if someone is shy or outgoing just by looking at their handwriting.
Not really, and it's certainly not accurate enough to make important decisions about people.
Okay, so what are some better ways to understand personality?
Well, the big 5 personality traits are a good place to start.
What are those?
There are 5 broad dimensions of personality: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay, and what do they tell you about someone?
Well, for example, someone who scores high in openness is likely to be curious, imaginative, and open to new experiences.
And someone who scores low.
They might be more practical, conventional, and prefer routine.
Okay, what about conscientiousness?
People who score high in conscientiousness are organized, responsible, and disciplined.
And low scorers.
They might be more spontaneous, flexible, and less concerned with rules.
Okay, what about extroversion?
High scorers are outgoing, sociable, and energized by social interaction.
And low scorers.
They tend to be more introverted, quiet, and prefer solitude.
Okay, what about agreeableness?
High scorers are compassionate, cooperative, and trusting.
And low scores.
They might be more skeptical, competitive, and assertive.
Okay, and finally, neuroticism.
High scores are more prone to anxiety, worry, and negative emotions.
And low scores.
They tend to be more emotionally stable, calm, and resilient.
Okay, so those are the big five personality traits I've heard. That you can also tell something about someone's personality by the length of their fingers.
Yeah, there's some research on that, but it's not as well established as the big five.
Okay, and finally, what about that whole left brain, right brain thing?
Yeah, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but the idea is that different parts of the brain are specialized for different functions.
So, like, the left brain is more logical and the right brain is more creative.
It's not quite that simple, but there's some truth to it.
Okay, and is there any way to tell which side of your brain is dominant?
There are some tests, but they're not very scientific.
Like what?
Well, one is to interlock your fingers and see which thumb is on top.
And what does that tell you?
Supposedly, if your right thumb is on top, you're more left-brained, and if your left thumb is on top, you're more right-brained.
Interesting, but probably not something to base any major life decisions on?
Probably not, but it's a fun thing to try. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We've talked about how to shift our mindset, how to spend our money wisely, how to persuade others, how to manage stress, how to make better decisions, and how to understand ourselves and others.
And all of this is based on solid research.
That's right. We've tried to present these complex ideas in a way that's clear, concise, and actionable.
And hopefully engaging.
Exactly. We want you to be able to take these insights and use them to improve your life.
So as you go about your day, think about which of these ideas resonated with you the most.
What surprised you? What challenged your assumptions?
And how can you apply these insights to your own life?
Food for thought. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and inspiring.
Absolutely. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.